Ooh. Never before have I been so completely baffled at a series of flickering images on my television. Never before have I felt so convinced that a group of television writers hated me. Never before have I gone into an adaptation of anything with so much confidence, not in it being good, but in it being decent, only to be so aggressively let down. That's how I felt watching the credits roll on the final episode of Like a Dragon Yakuza, Prime Video's answer to the 9 Circles of Hell. I exaggerate, of course, I've seen worse things than this, but of those worst things I've watched, I can say of most of them that they had something more than a name that kept me watching. The car crash wasn't captivating enough that I simply could not turn away. Not only did I want to turn away from this show, I would have dropped it by episode 2 if it didn't have the Yakuza name attached to it. This isn't going to be styled like any of the videos I've done so far. Chief among the distinctions here is that I'm pretty sure I can't use any footage from the show to explain my points. I don't think it's really necessary since I don't really want to talk about the plot. If you've seen the show, you know it's a boring, confusing mess of events that barely relate to one another, with barely any emotional stakes when it comes to the actual core conflicts of the show. I can't add much to the discussion by pointing out the obvious. Everything surrounding the plot is so fundamentally broken that I'd be doing a crime to just go beat by beat explaining why the plot alone is bad. I'll do my best to explain any visual or auditory components I have with specific scenes or moments, but just know that you're not going to see much of anything from the show in this video. I'll try to manage some relevant footage from the games, but honestly, this is more about the words I'm saying than anything I'm showing on screen. So if you want to just treat this like a podcast and listen rather than watch, I totally get it. I was also thinking about taking a page from the show's note and jumping between my initial watch and a rewatch perspective when appropriate, do some big reviewer gimmick thing. But unlike the show, I don't want to confuse you and leave you questioning why I'd even bother telling the earlier narrative if it just means I'm going to be purposefully vague with the sequel narrative, which itself doesn't even matter beyond giving you the final act of the story. So I'm just going to tackle this in a holistic manner, not obscuring anything, keeping it as focused as possible. One topic to the next. That means insane spoilers, both for the show and for these games, starting immediately. So if you want to watch it for yourself, then I recommend you do. I don't recommend watching it of its own merits, though. Far from it. Your money is better spent elsewhere. Like my brand new Patreon. And one last thing, because I know someone's going to say it. Some of this stuff is going to seem like nitpicking. 1, that's something I'm good at, don't devalue my talents. And 2, I have a very different set of expectations and standards between video games and television/film. I'm a movie guy, not a film bro, totally different things, and I know a lot about the construction of film. Funny enough, I took a course in college last year that mimicked the setting and process of a writer's room for television. That means with whatever I watch, I'm probably going to notice a lot more than just a bad story or bad acting, which this show does have both of, but that means I'm going to talk a lot about that other stuff here. And I know this is still a video game show, but consider that in recent years we've gotten The Last of Us and Fallout, 2 video game shows that got massive critical and audience acclaim. This show has no excuse to suck, and yet it does. All of that out of the way, let's begin. Alright, I'm not a sadist. Let's start with the good. If there's anything positive I can say about the show, it's that the first episode's pretty solid. We get some good interactions between characters, exposition's laid down thick, but not too much to the point that the plot stops moving forward, and the plot itself is understandable and logical, for the most part. The plot of this episode, at least. There's some good tension all around, and the way it jumps back and forth between 1995 and 2005 doesn't take focus away from any one part of the narrative. If you look at this episode as a beginning to a greater story, just a random J-drama that you picked out of a hat, it works. That's it. Those are the positives. Let's stop putting off the execution here, folks. This show's problems start from the Amazon page itself. That title, what the hell is that supposed to mean? Ignore the fact that it's just Yakuza 7's localized title, but reversed. Not to mention the name of the movie adaptation, but reversed. Well, actually, no, don't ignore that. We have so much precedent to name the show Yakuza Like a Dragon. Or, you know what, just call it Like a Dragon. Weren't we supposed to be unifying the series by name across regions anyway? The word Yakuza shouldn't be anywhere near this title. I mean, the Japanese name of the show is Like a Dragon Beyond the Game. What's wrong with that? If anything, that's automatically a better name, specifically because this show isn't an adaptation. Not a direct one, anyway. As I understand it, the show was meant to be a complete reimagining of the first Yakuza game, taking the characters and general plot, but putting a whole new spin on it. Beyond the game, it makes sense. How are you supposed to get that impression with this title? If anything, this title makes the show seem like some off-brand bootleg garbage, like some Yakuza Wars shit. Except even that was somehow on brand. Think about it like this. If all you had to go off of was this screenshot, would you be convinced to find out what this is? If you didn't already love Yakuza, would this gibberish entice you to try watching this show? I think the answer is a pretty resounding no, unless you're the type of person to watch random J-dramas out of morbid curiosity, in which case more power to you. Lord knows my watch list is full of garbage. And this is not a nitpick. I know I mentioned that earlier, but this is a serious, damning part of the show. More than that, it's the show's biggest problem in microcosm. It cannot decide for the life of it what it actually wants to be. The second biggest problem is everything else. Actually, no, that's the third biggest problem. The second biggest problem is the English dub. I don't have anywhere else it fits, so I'll just get it out of the way now. I don't know who was in charge of directing these poor people, because I know a good amount of them are so much better than this. There's precisely one good performance, and it comes from Kazuma's voice. Everyone else is terrible. It feels like everyone in 2005 is trying to play serious by speaking in as bored a tone as possible, as quietly as possible. Thankfully, 1995 doesn't get left untainted because Dojima always sounds like that, and the rest of the cast is not doing well enough to make up for it. Miho especially just sounds like she does not want to be here, and again, I have no clue how that's happening. They had the likes of Matthew Mercer, Santi Huynh, Kaiji Tang, Johnny Yongbosch, and Luke from Streets, many of them veterans of the Yakuza dub scene, and they couldn't pull one decent performance out of the lot of them. But it's not even just the directing in this case, it's the writing. Watching this show in English feels like watching that one ProZD skit where he's all like, "Fuck you, Sasuke! Ore, am done with your shitty attitude!" Here's a short list of some of the Japanese words that do not get translated for some reason. Aniki, Oyaji, Kaicho. Granted, those are all hierarchical denotations. It sounds pretty understandable so far, right? Kanpai. Literally just means cheers, but sure, let's keep it, setting accurate, I guess. Omi Rengo. In what game has the Omi Alliance ever been referred to in English as the Omi Rengo? I mean, granted, in Yakuza 1, they were the Omi family, and this is better than that. But still, it just doesn't make sense that they wouldn't translate that title. And I'm pretty sure on that note that they also say Tojo Kai instead of clan, but that one is also inconsistent because I know they say clan sometimes. Anyway, Otosan. This one's probably the biggest crime because it means the Jujutsu Kaisen fandom gets deprived of English Gojo, aka Dojima, saying, "From now on, I'm your daddy." You know that would have broken the internet. I would have paid money to see that happen. Oh my. Never mind, this is the biggest crime. Holy shit. It literally just means you. This is word for word exactly like the ProZD skit. Whatever, I'm done with the preamble. It's about time we get into the meat of potatoes as to why this show is an abomination. Oh my god, can you tell I wrote that at like 5 a.m.? Well, it's time to get into the meat and potatoes is why this show's fucking bad. Ugh. Presentation-wise, the show is a constant mess of confusion and misguided attempts at being cool. The cold open is weird and doesn't give it much of a unique identity. Literally flashing the main characters' names on screen with roles they only occupied this one time is not only trite, it's also odd. It could have been cool if they'd have brought it back after the time skip to recontextualize them. For example, call Yumi the entrepreneur, Nishiki the chairman's right hand, Kiryu the Oyagoroshi. It'd also bring some more mystique to Miho being gone in 2005, more than just not bringing it up anyway, which is what they do. Not to mention it would help the viewer keep track of who's who between time periods, because believe me, that is something that I had a little bit of trouble with on my first watch. There's a lot of other moments like that, such as the ever-mocked Mr. Blue Sky musical montage, but one that rings worse for me specifically is when they somehow manage an edgy cover of the already edgy cover of Mad World by Tears for Fears. It may be that these are simply conventions of the J-drama presentation handbook, but if I'm being completely honest, all of these things just make the show feel 10 years out of date. Isn't that fitting? Adding to that feeling is at least one scene that uses Inception horn sound-alikes, and there's also a fucking fart joke in one episode. I already don't like daytime or evening TV dramas, and realizing how much this show lifts from all of those conventions was just painful. On the more technical side of things, the show is pretty consistent with having terrible cinematography. There's basically no shot diversity. If characters are talking, it's shot reverse shot. If something dramatic's happening, expect close-ups and wide shots of nothing in particular. And I emphasize the nothing part of that because this show has a consistent problem with not actually making things that matter the focus of their shots. The terrible lighting is a part of that. Shadows can be weirdly present in scenes that need you to see everything, or scenes that would otherwise benefit from having a more clear view of everything in the shot. And everything has this horrible blue and purple haze at night. It's like someone looked at Infinite Wealth and thought it had good lighting, which it doesn't. It has horrible lighting. But this show somehow looks worse than that. Beyond the lighting, though, there's a horrible trend of not making it obvious who or what is the main component of a shot. And now we're literally just getting to textbook problems. Sometimes a character that's speaking will be tucked into the corner of the screen or behind a bunch of other people, or otherwise made incredibly hard to discern. But there's one scene where Majima's fighting a bunch of people in a big, Tojo brawl, and at some point it becomes literally impossible to see him because of the crowd and the camera being pulled back as far as it is. Speaking of those action-packed scenes, nothing is done with the camera to lend any sense of drama to the situation. Everyone already knows the fight scenes suck, and that comes down to camera and choreography issues. But one scene where the camera work especially ruins everything is the short shootout with Majima in 1995. The camera is pulled so far back during every shot here. It removes you from the action and gives the whole scene a weirdly surgical mood. Especially that moment where the announcer man gets shot in the leg and it just hangs on him stumbling. It feels like they were trying to emulate a Coen Brothers style of methodically capturing action without explicitly favoring any parties involved, No Country for Old Men, Fargo type of shit. But it just comes off like their practical effects wouldn't have held up under a closer shot. Speaking of effects, the practical stuff can sometimes look fine. And then there's moments like the bird pecking at Shimano's carved up chest where it's so obvious that it's just a rubber suit. The CG, on the other hand, never looks good. There isn't too much of it, thank God. The worst instance I can recall is when Kiryu headbutts that dude in his first fight, but none of it ever looks remotely convincing. Any shot involving the exterior of the Millennium Tower is terrible, and some of the establishing shots on the areas around the Omi's headquarters are also off. I don't know if this counts as a presentation thing, but I'm not sure when else to mention that the whole gimmick of bouncing between time periods is executed very poorly. In general, I'm not big on telling stories this way. It's why I prefer the Yakuza 4 and 5 style of multiple protagonists over the Yakuza 0 method. Beyond creating artificial drama by just stopping one story when something important is happening, it becomes really obvious once you start actually paying attention to how much of each episode takes place in the past, that there's basically no reason for the future segments to even be included. The only time it feels even remotely relevant is in the first episode. After that, it's just a tedious process of watching every idiot in Japan try to find the least subtle people and the least subtle thing that could have possibly been stolen of all time. All of the important shit happens in the past. Kiryu and Nishiki growing distant, Aiko and Yumi's conflict being explained, and the resulting escalation when Aiko reinserts herself into Yumi's life, Dojima working to build the Millennium Tower, literally everything involving Miho. All of that happens exclusively in the past. If you were to divide the show into 95 and 05 clearly, I am very confident in saying that only 2 episodes tops would be 2005, and the other 4 would be entirely made up of stuff from the past. And there's the real kicker here, that's only the main story and most relevant side plots being accounted for, because there's nothing else to consider. Despite this being a TV show with hours more time to flesh out the world and implement things that emulate the identity of the games in some way or another, it chooses to tell 1.5 stories that don't have anything remotely interesting going on. The actual city of Kamurocho barely matters at all. There's none of the mystique that comes from exploring the world and learning about the criminal underworld within, no cast of charming and interesting minor characters that inhabit the setting and get up to things without the protagonist's involvement, not even any fun bombastic moments outside of the main plot that actually manage to stick the landing. Even the worst Yakuza game can manage at least one unabashedly cool moment of side content. And this show wasn't able to figure that out in 6 episodes. There's always one thing or another holding it back from the heights that the games often manage effortlessly. And if we're talking about how the show doesn't feel like Yakuza, then I think it's best to close out that topic by mentioning the soundtrack. I mean, it's boring, obviously. Not many TV shows are known for having stellar OSTs that don't just rely on licensed tracks. But what especially gets me about this one is that it's so instrumentally bland. Most of it is just lethargic electronic stuff, but then the final episode pulls out this stupid, terrible action orchestra that wouldn't work even in a purposefully schlocky mockery of TV dramas. Any scene involving Chairman Sarah has that one Japanese instrument that plays whenever an old guy who matters is on screen, Most damning, though, is the lack of electric guitar. There's maybe 3 tracks total that have it here, and one of them is the emotional piece that plays whenever the show wants to convince you that something sad is happening. It gets old about as fast as every other sad sub-story theme in this series. And that's it. What's arguably the most quintessential instrument in Yakuza's musical history barely makes any appearance in this show. It only adds to that feeling that the show didn't want to be a Yakuza thing, or if it does, then it fundamentally misunderstands what makes the series special, or what even makes it Yakuza in the first place. Now, before I move on to the characters, there are a few more random things I want to discuss. First off, the show is prone to showing sequences of events that don't follow any kind of logic. And I mean that on a very small scale. It's packed full of moments that literally make no sense. And not in the comedic, absurd way that you'd expect from a sub-story in the games. I mean just straight up confusing. One thing that constantly happens is that people just don't do anything when told to. The first episode alone has a few moments like this, the best being when the main 4 are taken to Dojima's big office. He's eating breakfast or something, and then he tells them to eat too, because he's just so nice. They do nothing. He repeats himself, come over here, eat some breakfast. They still do nothing. Then he says it again, and they start sluggishly making their way towards the food, and it's only on his 4th or 5th ask that they actually start eating. You'd think the point of this is to show the kids' tension in the moment, and I think that that's what they're going for, I really do. But they're failing horribly at conveying that. The action here is paced incredibly awkwardly. There's no close-up shots to highlight nervous expressions. In fact, the cameras are basically static in this scene. They're all pulled way too far back. It happens with the other ones too. Earlier in this episode, Kazuma stands on a dude's arm for like 15 straight seconds while no one does anything the dude is begging for them to do. And then in another episode, Nishiki tells his family members to get a ceremonial drink for Kiryu, and they all just stand there for way too long. You'd think with the position he occupies that they would go actually follow his orders a little bit faster. At this point, hesitation hardly acts as an excuse. Lower the camera quality and these scenes just look like really dumb skits from 2009 YouTube. Some other off-kilter moments that come to mind are Yumi screaming at Haruka for basically no reason. I get that she's worried about Aiko or something, but it just does nothing positive for her image. Literally everyone in the show is a massive asshole except for Kazuma and Haruka, so by default it just makes Yumi look bad regardless of why she's doing it. Mind that when I say that all 4 of the main guys hate Kazuma for basically no reason for a considerable part of the show. There's also that part after the Majima fight when Nishiki points his gun at Kiryu for, again, no reason at all. I guess it was trying to suggest some sort of underlying tension between the two, that or it was just stupidly on the nose foreshadowing. Either way, there was literally no reason for him to do it. The only way this could have worked is if Kiryu randomly started taunting him like Majima did, and then the show revealed it was actually a comedy and everyone died in the past but was still there in the future where they spend all their time brooding instead of talking. It wouldn't fix the show, but at least it would have become more tolerable. Oh, what else? There's the Millennium Tower. Just the fact that it exists and looks like it does. It was built sometime before 2005. What the hell is this weird sci-fi dildo doing here? Also, it apparently has a massive amphitheater in it and a mega mall, among other things. I get that it flares out at the top for some goddamn reason, but I refuse to believe there's room for half of the stuff Dojima said would be in it. Maybe that's the point, but I don't think the show is smart enough for that to be what it was going for. Probably the most confusing moment in the show for me was how they handled the florist. And this isn't like the movie where the florist was this brand new interpretation that was really well characterized and played an important role in nearly everyone's story. Although, I guess this guy is still sort of creepy. It's all vibes though, he doesn't actually do anything to earn his creepiness. Not like the movie anyway. The worst he does is steal that little stamp from Edgar's sister in like a vaguely, creepy way. He acts creepy, but he doesn't do anything creepy. You know what I mean? Anyway, this florist gets an entire backstory setting him up, something no other side character gets in the entire show. And it's capped off with that bit from the fucking Fant Four Stick movie, where Miles Teller looks at Thing and goes, "Say that again." Dojima literally looks right at the florist, explains that you would rob the souls on the banks of the River Sai. And then he's like, "I'm gonna call you the florist of Sai because you gave me flowers for no reason at all." It's a scene that's literally 10 years out of style. It fits really well with those Inception horns I mentioned earlier. And then all of this for what? A character that's in a grand total of like 3 episodes for a cumulative, 20 minutes? It doesn't make any sense that they'd spend so long establishing him, at the expense of creating any other interesting minor characters, just to never use him in a remotely satisfying way. And he's not even in purgatory. He's under the Millennium Tower, not even up on top of it. So it's like if they mixed up the first and second games and got the wrong parts of both of them. Oh, and they fake out killing him later, but that doesn't even mean anything to me because this is not my florist. And he gets a game-accurate outfit too. That's the biggest slap in the face. Why did they go to all of that effort to recreate the florist so intricately just to not use him? Especially when the only other character that looks anything like the in-game counterpart is Kiryu? It just doesn't make sense. It's more nebulous than everything else here, but there's also the random moments where the show flashes back to times that are either wholly unrelated to the story, or some amount of days earlier but still in the future or the past. It's already hard enough to keep track of what's happening when, and this is a me problem, but the subtitles on Prime Video kept messing up so I couldn't tell when and where some things were taking place. Even without those issues though, it just doesn't make sense to jump around within a single time period when the whole show was about jumping between time periods. Either keep this stuff to the pre-intro segments so that we know that there's something else, or just tell your story in a competent way. Oh, and how could I forget the parts where the show just randomly turns into different games? I mean, I said before that they didn't play any of the games before making the show, and I'm still pretty sure that that's true. So how is it that they ended up just making the plot of Yakuza 0 but worse? You know? It's literally occurring to me as I write this that the white dude and his sister were basically Tachibana and Makoto, which is hurting my head. But aside from that, there's the whole thing of Dojima stealing land to build the Millennium Tower, Kiryu and Nishiki trying to make something of themselves in the Yakuza. Those core ideas are present, but not enough of substance actually happens to make it feel like a proper story. It's just watching Kiryu fight underground while Nishiki either gets a bad idea or gets manipulated into sabotaging things for the both of them. Although Kiryu was straight up in the Yakuza for the entire 1995 portion of the show. So I guess if nothing else, they managed to make a story where he's in the Yakuza for longer than 10 seconds. Good job, I guess. And then the 2005 parts of the show are clearly trying to be Kiwami, and I'll get more into the Kiwami specific part of that later. But they get such bizarre things completely wrong. Well, not wrong, like it's a reimagining, I get that. But these decisions only increase the confusion levels for anybody coming to the show after playing the first game. Or Kiwami, whatever. For starters, why does Yumi have a sister? Literally the one thing that the first game explained into the ground, and the show decided to completely cull that idea and create Aiko? To what end? It doesn't make any sense. The story's no better for having her. All it does is create the worst thing of all time, and then subject you to hours of her. And then there's the 10 billion yen. In the show, it was the Omi Alliance's money. I don't even remember why or how it is that this came to be the Tojo's problem. Considering how quickly everyone who matters realizes that Aiko stole the money, why would they even arrive at that conclusion? Maybe that's the point, that they were already on such rocky ground that was the spark that nearly burned down Kamurocho? But that's stupid! Removing any agency from the Tojo in the matter of the 10 billion yen just serves to minimize their already minuscule role in the story. The only Tojo people that matter are Dojima and Nishiki, and I was never under the impression that anybody else was remotely relevant, no matter how much they yelled at the camera. It just gets weirder, dude. We get to the really weird stuff here. First off, there were some choice names that get used for nothing characters that I'm positive aren't meant to be who those characters were in the games. People already know about Shibusawa being the guy who gets Kiryu and Nishiki to rob the Maharaja Club with him. It's that club, by the way. Except instead of being a disco joint, it's now that vampire rave cave from Blade. Anyway, the one that caught my attention was Kanemura being the name of the dude who the demon sliced up in the Chinese restaurant. Ignore the fact that Lau Kalong is just not in the series. I really miss him. Kanemura was the name of the guy in 4 who Lily sliced and diced. He was the head of Kido and Arai's family. He dies in a weirdly similar way here, at least insofar as it was by a knife and it's a mystery, and I cannot tell if that was meant to be some sort of connection. There are so many other names they could have gone with. Maybe this was an Easter egg? Possibly. Really dumb Easter egg if so. It's just a pointless reference to a nothing character that, again, gets completely glossed over. And again, it brings into question how much about the games the showrunners actually knew going into this. Is this a full original reimagining, you know? Well, how much is this based on? Maybe there's probably a really actual answer for this, but I'm gonna be straight with you. I don't care. If there is an answer, I'm sorry I'm not getting that right. I'm sorry if I'm spreading misinformation here. But I'm gonna level with you. Regardless of whether the show is reimagining Yakuza 1 or reinventing it, or trying and failing to adapt it, or just purposefully changing some parts so that it could technically be longer. It doesn't matter. It's failing at the corest idea of that, telling a good story. It doesn't matter how that idea came to be. What matters is that they're failing at it. But getting back to the other games thing, you already know the big one. For some goddamn reason, this show decided to include a serial killer who's going around killing random people and some plot-relevant characters sometimes. Aside from sort of resembling Lily's reluctant rampage. Jesus God, man, it's not that deep. Do not write a poem for me to recite at goddamn 11 p.m. This is straight up the mole from Judgment. He even wears a black cloak, and just like in Judgment, the reveal of the killer isn't remotely satisfying. Granted, it's for different reasons. In Judgment, the identity of the mole never really matters so much as finding out who he's working for, and then when he does get revealed, it's a complete flop because the game never actually gave you any decent clues as to who he turns out to be. It's Kuroiwa, by the way. I just remembered I listed Judgment as one of the games I'd spoil earlier, so I figured I'd actually spoil it. With the show, of course the demon is Nishiki. Who else would it be? It isn't a reveal if it's not a character you already know, and as much as the show probably wants you to think it's Aiko, it's obviously not Aiko. I never once thought it was Aiko, it's just so obviously Nishiki. The show was just smart enough to realize that that would probably be too easy, but stupid enough to make it the second most likely suspect. My main issue with it isn't actually how obvious it is, but how unbelievable it is. You're really gonna tell me that not only did Nishiki decide in the 10 years gone that his ultimate goal would be killing pretty much everybody he could for the sake of destroying the Tojo clan? As opposed to, I don't know, working with a bunch of other criminals to climb the Tojo ranks by whatever means necessary? You know, that's a little bit more realistic of a goal. Not only that, but he managed to become a hyper-capable ninja assassin guy? In 10 years? Less than that, at latest he killed Kanemura in 2003, so 8 years. And we don't even get some kind of insight into how either of these things happened? Oh no, wait, don't tell me. Was he training in the shadows like the other famously terrible twist villain from everyone's favorite dumpster fire? I'm so tired of this series turning incapable losers into final bosses just because it would be a twist. You're already advertising this show as beyond the game. Wouldn't this have been a good time to make literally anybody but Nishiki the big bad? Speaking of incapable losers, it's about time we talk about the automatons walking around on set that the show wants to pretend are characters. I'm confident saying that this show has no standout performances in it, and it's chock full of straight up bad ones. Either is actor bored out of their skulls or playing things up way too much to take seriously, and only one of those should be in a J-drama. I think the bored ones are trying to be serious like I've been saying, but it just doesn't come off that way. Not to mention that none of the characters from the game look remotely like their in-game counterparts, barring some exceptions, and that's a matter of both casting and costuming. And even then, there's some nobody characters that look a lot like they're supposed to be characters from the game, but they just aren't. Of all the goddamn people, apparently Shindo was somewhere in here, but for the life of me, I could not tell you who he was. I thought it might have been Dojima's secondhand guy that Nishiki inherited after he died, but I'm pretty sure he's not that guy. I think he's somebody else. I don't know. Maybe IMDb was lying to me, who knows. Starting from the bottom and working up to the main problems, main characters, pretty much none of the side characters in this show have anything interesting going on with them. I talked about the florist earlier and about how he doesn't get used to any remotely good degree. The chairman of each organization are boring, Shimano is rowdy and angry, and that's it. Reina says some supporting words sometimes, and that's it. Date just smirks, and that's it. There's not a lot of nuance going on here. Majima just is not in the show. He has maybe 4 scenes in total, one of them where he does nothing. One of them where he fights Kiryu and Nishiki, which might have been fun if the camera work was any good at all. The choreography in this scene is actually salvageable, but again, the camera work just renders it all moot. Also, why does this scene have a flamenco sounding track over it? Majima's never been represented with this kind of music, and this track is hardly standout compared to Baile con la Mariposa or La Muerte del Gobierno. The third scene is where he loses his eye, and that one's sorta cool, but those are all that he gets by the end of episode 3. It takes until episode 6 for him to show up again, and then he's completely shifted to funny Kiwami Majima. No in-between, no exploration of what might have gotten him to that point, and why is he saying Kiryu-chan? The only interactions he's had with Kiryu by this point have been losing to him and Nishiki, and, I don't know, Watching his brother die because of the both of them? Where's this fondness coming from? Why doesn't he hate his guts? He's just like this because he's like that in the games. Majima is nothing here. Somehow the movie's Majima managed to be more nuanced, and that's not an insult to that, that's an insult to this. Movie Majima was great. He probably got more screen time too, good god. Saejima is somehow less than nothing. Shows up in 2 scenes, one where he does nothing, and one where he dies. That's it. He's also incredibly short, and his hair does not look at all like Saejima's. It looks like Nishiki's from Josho, actually. This just should not have been Saejima. He shouldn't have even been present. His death literally doesn't matter. Death in quotation marks, that is. He doesn't actually get confirmed dead on screen to my memory, and even if he did, he'll probably just be back at season 2 anyway. Why should we expect different by this point? Dojima is one of the more baffling depictions in the show. In the games, he's basically nothing, so you'd hope they'd iterate on that here, right? Of course not! He pretends to matter, the show pretends that he matters, but he never does anything of substance. The closest he gets to that is in manipulating Kiryu and Nishiki to throw a big fight so he gets to win big money, which doesn't even work, mind. But even then, that whole thing relies on him having built a relationship with Nishiki that he could then levy against him. That doesn't happen. There's one scene where he says that he'll do that, it's the Otosan scene, and then he just doesn't. Or if he does, it's completely off screen. He also fails at manipulating that white dude into giving him the deed to his land, so I'm left skeptical of his ability to manipulate anything. So why should I assume he was able to do anything with Nishiki off screen? Oh, also, apparently he was lying to Nishiki the entire time about basically everything to do with his sister. Not even just about the money or there not being a donor. I mean the fact that Nishiki would have been able to give Miho a kidney anyway. There's a classic Yakuza-ism right there, at least the show got that part right. Be so evil that you remove all of the protagonist's agency and potential consequences in the process of manipulating them. And it's not even like Yakuza 4 where Saejima still destroyed the Sasai family because of the Ueno hit. This would be like if it was revealed that Sasai had a stroke before Saejima even did the hit, so Shibata got promoted without any need for Saejima's imprisonment. And then he went on to blame Majima for no reason at all other than drama. We will get to that. Moving on, Kazuma is probably the closest thing the show gets to an actual compelling character. He cares about his kids, proves he was and is a capable man and fighter, and goes well out of his way to protect his kids and the Tojo clan. He also gives one of the few decent performances in the show, dub and sub-wise. It's a shame he's barely shown for most of it. Like, he's around, it's not like Dojima where he just doesn't get to do anything. But I wish that there had been more of him, especially considering that tension between him and Kiryu about joining the Yakuza sort of just dissipates for no reason. It would have been nice to get a more satisfying conclusion to that arc. Instead, we get stupid sequel bait. That's right, he doesn't die either. In fact, I'll skip to it now. No one who has any importance dies in this show. Aiko and Nishiki get wheeled out in ambulances, so they're definitely going to be fine. Like I said, even Saejima's probably alive. This series in general has such a problem with killing off characters, but it was so egregious in this show, especially considering the plot of Yakuza 1, where literally everyone who needed to die for the plot died. At least it got that part right. None of these characters are interesting enough for me to want to see more of them, so why does the show treat them like they're all as iconic as Kiryu himself? Anyways, back to the character talk. Oh, that was nice, it was nice to have such simple things to say about Kazuma. A nice, calm criticism. Aiko is probably the worst female character ever written for a Yakuza thing ever. She is so fiercely unlikable for every single second she's on screen, and worse than that, she's annoying. She's constantly smacking gum in most of her scenes, she gives off this obnoxious air of not caring about literally anything but herself, and she constantly does heinous shit to everyone around her, especially Yumi and Miho. It's not even worth going through her rap sheet, she's just insufferable. But that's not even the bad part. I can deal with a character being a bad person. Those ones are often way more interesting. Yeah, at least Park in 5 had some nuance to her for a little bit. At least Yui in the movie had reasons for doing what she did. Aiko doesn't. But that's not the bad part either. It's that the show considers Aiko redeemable. Not just redeemable, the show thinks that she does redeem herself in her final moments. When she dies, again in quotes, you're meant to be sad. Let me reiterate. The person who abandoned her younger sister for pretty much no reason, for years, manipulated her out of thousands of yen and into getting a job that she sabotaged for everyone involved by giving minors fake IDs, sparked the entire conflict of the show out of nothing but greed and apathy, and worst of all, when confronted with the sudden realization that her own daughter may have been hurt or killed in an exploding building, ran away. With no hesitation. When that person jumps in front of a hail of bullets to save her sister, you're supposed to think that's tragic. I would be laughing if I weren't so angry. Speaking of that daughter, Haruka's an embarrassing downgrade from her appearance in the game. This one's a simple case of TV child, though. Not child actor. She does fine with what she's given. I mean child character. She's just annoying. She doesn't do anything but complain and get kidnapped. Barely any interactions with Kiryu either. So if you wanted any proof that they didn't play the games first to understand the story and characters beyond my talking about it earlier, there you go. Alright, now on to the real big hitters, the big four. Miho is straight up misery porn. She exists to be present, make everyone around her sad, make you sad, and then die. She has few, if any, identifiable character traits, personality traits, or aspirations. Let's name them off. She's upbeat, she's naive and impressionable, and she wants to see the world and have kids. That is the best I can give you. And hey, remember how in my Josho video I said it was good that they kept Yuko's illness ambiguous so that it didn't come across as the only identifiable feature about her, which allowed her to remain as an effective narrative device to bring Yumi and the boys closer together? Miho is maybe 15, works at a hostess club, and drinks so much in one night that her kidneys explode. That is why she eventually dies. So never mind the fact that Reina is a terrible person for allowing this to happen and not taking any responsibility for it. They did the exact thing that I said would put way too much of a spotlight on her and make it more obvious that she's not even a character, and it in fact did those things. She only exists so that those hospital scenes make you sad, and then hopefully you think the show's good because it made you feel something. Speaking of things I've done, you remember how I made a whole video about Yumi? You remember how I said that she's not a character and her relationship with Kiryu is completely empty, and how I hoped that this show would do literally anything with her? Ugh. I can't believe I even hoped for something decent. Yumi's still as empty as she's always been. Everything important about her, everything that she cares about, is some other character. Technically, Ares is still a thing, but it's in one scene in the first episode, and I don't believe for a second that this Yumi is anywhere near capable enough to start up and run a hostess club at the top of the city on her own. It's a hostess club, by the way. It's not a bar. It's too big. A bar I could have believed. And I did. Anyway, there's this whole thing about how she has a bad relationship with Aiko, and I think the show tries to build towards her being a good sister to Miho, but guess what? She's a horrible sister to Miho. She's a completely passive element in her life. She doesn't do anything to stop Miho from exploding her kidneys. She doesn't do anything to stop Miho from going with her to an incredibly seedy part of town to find Aiko. She's only marginally more present for her in the hospital compared to Kiryu and Nishiki. And even if that last bit is a bit of an exaggeration, isn't it too late for that whole good sister thing to matter at this point? And no, that isn't what the show was trying to do. It never examines Yumi as a victim of abuse perpetuating that cycle. It just pretends she has an arc, when in reality she herself has nothing important about her. She doesn't matter in the plot. She doesn't do anything of note on her own. She isn't even given a love triangle to make things between her and the guys remotely complicated. Nishiki non-consensually kisses her for like 3 seconds, and I think maybe she hugged Kiryu before he went to jail. And then that's it. So, hey, to anyone who was out here hating on Yakuza 1 for having an empty romance in the story, you got your wish. Now there's no romance, and Yumi still contributes nothing to the narrative. Oh my god. It is so hard being a fan of the first game. And then there were two. Honestly, I don't really have much to say about Nishiki as a character. He's basically just Yakuza 0, but worse. What I mean by that is that the show wants to show how close he and Kiryu are during their time in the business, but all it manages to convince me of is that these two need to stay the hell away from each other. There's nothing positive that comes from the two of them interacting. Even when they're acting positive, it never feels like they actually enjoy each other's company. Where in Josho, it's clear how the two relate to each other, and how the seeds of Nishiki's betrayal were planted during their formative years, only to sprout when he lost his circle of support. The TV show instead makes the bold choice to give Kiryu and Nishiki zero chemistry. I don't even think they get up to much in the grand scheme of things. Like, They share a lot of scenes, but in very few of them do I get the feeling of a brotherly bond forming or existing between the two. Think about it like this. In Josho, the first thing we see of Kiryu and Nishiki is the two of them playing catch, wondering out loud about the new girl. Both of them know something must have happened to her parents. They're not stupid, but they're at a loss for how to deal with it. They're on the same page, they understand each other and their situation, and they're solving it together. The earliest interaction we see between Kiryu and Nishiki in the show is their first meeting. A lot of potential there, where Kiryu drops the earth-shattering line, "You're short, dude." And then through some set of insane circumstances, they and the girls end up fighting off some random bullies who are way too old to pursue violence after nearly hitting a child with their car. They instantly go from total strangers, with Kiryu starting things off on a weird note, to bros for life. It's the sort of artificial connection that this show constantly uses, in a vain attempt to convince you that these characters like spending time around each other. Oh, as for Nishiki in 2005, he just spends the entire time brooding and feigning affinity with Kiryu. It's just 1995, but he stopped pretending to have fun. You might mistake that really stiff and clearly not passionate hug he has with Kiryu as a sign of some genuine affection left after 10 years, but it's pretty plain to see that there's somehow less going on here between them than there was in 95. Oh, also, he somehow manages to stab himself when Kiryu keeps hugging him during the final fight. That was really funny. Maybe it was on purpose, but it did not look like it. It's just an embarrassing display from all parties. That whole final fight, that whole final confrontation in the Millennium Tower was just terrible. Nothing fucking happened. Like, they punched each other for a little bit, and then Kiryu just keeps hugging him over and over again. I get what they're going for, but you do not have to literally have him hug Nishiki 5 times and get stabbed every single time except the last one where Nishiki stabs himself to show that Kiryu is trying to salvage a relationship. Have you heard of a metaphor? TV writers, have you heard of subtlety? I know that this is Yakuza, but Yakuza 1 was one of the few games that understood what that word meant. You could at least pretend you've heard of it. And now we've arrived at Kiryu. Woo, yay. He's arguably the worst part of the show, funny enough. I mean, he's worse than Aiko, and I made that whole stink about her earlier. And it comes down to one simple fact. It's something that I've been getting at for the entire video thus far. He's not Kiryu. He begins the show by tricking his siblings into helping him commit a heist, knowing the money belonged to the Dojima family. Also, he could join up with the Yakuza and abandon the 3 of them. And regardless of them staying at the orphanage despite his telling them not to, regardless of his intentions being to keep them safe, he put them all in danger. And every bad thing that happens after the fact can be directly traced back to this selfish choice. A choice that I could never, in a million years, believe any version of Kiryu would make. Because here's the thing. Kiryu's been in the wrong before. Even the games have acknowledged that. Yakuza 6 is all about Kiryu knowingly doing the wrong thing over and over, but being too stuck in his ways to do anything else. But never, in the history of the series, has Kiryu made the conscious choice to knowingly put people he loves in danger for the sake of his own selfish ambitions. Any time he's put people in danger, it was either out of his control, an attempt to keep them out of danger, or an attempt to help someone or something else that required him to be away from his family. But sure, you know what? Beyond the game. Let's consider that this is in fact beyond the game, supposedly. As I said of Aiko, I don't have a problem with characters being bad people, as long as their journey is fun to follow or thought-provoking. And we already know the show's not thought-provoking, so what about fun? Nope. Kiryu's normally something of a stick in the mud in like every game, but he's always had a sense of humor. This Kiryu's constantly either miserable, bored, or aggressive. In 2005 especially, he never displays an emotion that could be remotely described as positive. He's always the one brooding the hardest. He never lightens up around Nishiki or Yumi, and he's never softened by his time with Haruka because remember, they barely spend any time together. Granted, in 95, there are some moments where he has fun, but those are either at the expense of other people, or one of the scant few moments where being in the Yakuza isn't putting the people he loves in danger. And those moments are not plentiful or enjoyable enough to remotely consider his decision to join the Yakuza worth it. That decision weighs heavy over the show's entire runtime. It never lets you forget that that's what he did. And even if it were trying to let you forget it, you couldn't, because you're constantly being faced with the consequences of that choice. Miho is slowly wasting away. Yumi's probably unhappy, couldn't tell you for sure. Kazuma is trying his best to salvage something from the life Kiryu's just ruined for himself. And Nishiki is either out of his element, being taken for a ride, or blackmailed by Dojima. And speaking of that blackmail, there's one more thing that Kiryu does that utterly baffles me. Again, this pretty much encapsulates every problem I have with the show. That uppercut. Everything here is wrong. For starters, I'm gonna be blunt, this should have been some kind of fan service. Have him do a tiger drop or a dodge shot. For God's sake, just have him do the Yakuza kick. The show's already so lacking in anything that makes it feel like Yakuza. I have no doubt that if he'd done a tiger drop here, the reception would have automatically been just a little bit better. Getting to the main problem though, this is supposedly the moment where Kiryu betrays Nishiki. He won the fight even though he knew it would kill Miho. Except that for many reasons, he would have no way of knowing that. He gets this information while he's in the corner. The fight's been going on for a while. At this point, he's undeniably exhausted. Nishiki says it to him in a massive rush, right after getting outed for trying to slip Kiryu sleeping pills, and then Kiryu gets right back into the fight. I'd be shocked if he absorbed any of the information that just transpired in such a short span of time. If anything, he probably only caught something about Miho dying, which would further solidify his will to win the fight in her name. Most importantly, though, you cannot convince me that Kiryu made the choice to throw that uppercut. Consider the fact that he's completely cross-eyed when he throws it, and then instantly falls into the corner afterward. If it were not for the wall, he'd be on the ground. He's not lucid. He did it on instinct. If you consider that a betrayal, fine, I can see the case being made, but I just don't think it qualifies for what the show's going for. The chain of random quotes echoing seems to imply some kind of thought process he's working out, but I just laid out why I don't think those things would be occurring to him. He's getting his shit beaten in right now. That's even more reason for those things not to be in his head. Then there's the fact that it's instantly revealed right after the fact that Nishiki was being lied to, that there was never any donor, and Kiryu was perfectly fine to win the fight for Miho. Her life was basically already over by that point. So now it's doubly true that Kiryu didn't betray Nishiki, because Miho was gonna die anyway. Nishiki has every right to redirect that anger towards Dojima, and he technically does for a bit, but way too much of that anger stays at Kiryu. Maybe the betrayal he's referring to was that robbery at the beginning of the series, and how Kiryu lied so that he could leave them and join the Yakuza? If that's the case, hell yes, Kiryu betrayed you there. He betrayed all three of them without batting an eye, and again, I don't believe any version of Kiryu would do that. If that is in fact what's making Nishiki so upset that he turned his gun on Kiryu, then I'm willing to take back some of my harsh words here. But it sure seems a lot like he's still focused on the Miho thing. And I'm pretty sure that's what most people took away from that whole series of events anyway. So I feel confident saying that that's what the show was trying to convey. If it was, one more massive mistake on the pile. Even if it wasn't though, a mistake of that size still can't compare to the mountain of mistakes it rests on top of. Think about that. Whether or not the show's biggest emotional moment lands is utterly meaningless compared to how much else it gets wrong. Whew, goody gumdrops. I think that's it. That's everything I want to talk about with the show. I wrote this intending to make a video that's maybe 20 minutes long, but it'll definitely be longer than that, and I don't think I've said anything here that's worth cutting out. I meant it when I said that every part of this show is fundamentally flawed, and I doubly meant it when I said that it'd be a crime for me not to talk about that wealth of things that it does wrong. Maybe there were some good ideas. Maybe. But I don't even think that that's true. Nothing here can be salvaged. Not in a rewrite, not in the inevitable second season, which you know was going to happen. You'll never hear me saying that any piece of art doesn't deserve to exist or should be destroyed. I'm not that kind of person. But I think it's important to say that I don't think this show has done anything positive for the series or fan base. For one, it's bad. For two, it's confusing people on how it sits in canon. Which, you know, that's on some people for not understanding the whole reimagining beyond the game thing. But even then, I don't really blame them for that because it was so poorly conveyed. Like, I know it's not canon, and I think that most people are aware that it's not canon, but the fact that there's any confusion in the first place really shows that they should have thought out how they were presenting this thing. For 3, it's taking away valuable resources that need to be put into the games now that they're so intent on pretending to be AAA experiences. And most important to me, it might effectively replace the original film and the prologue film in fan discussions of Yakuza external media. Don't get me wrong, it doesn't just magically make them not exist, but just like the Kiwami games, it's providing a technically more modern coat of paint to a story that's already not very good, which lessens people's drive to seek out those older experiences. This is so easily accessible, and if none of them are great anyway, then why bother trying to watch the older and therefore worse option? I don't want to believe that people genuinely think that way, and I know most people don't, but too many people have proven that they do. And that's a shame. Not because older's always better, but because it shuts them out from experiences that they might otherwise enjoy. And it means those older experiences grow more and more forgotten, little by little, every day. That's why my movie watch list includes so much random junk. That's a big reason why I made this channel. I want to remember what we already have. Not so that you don't have to, but so that you can learn about it. And maybe you can go back and remember something too. I want to dig through the annals of history and find the stuff that might not be exceptional, but is still worth experiencing. And I want to know that there are people who care about this as much as I do. And there clearly are. This isn't the commemorative video I had in mind, and the one I promised will still come as soon as I can manage, but I want to say it with my voice. Thank you for getting this channel to over 1,000 subscribers. I've gone a lot of my life not knowing for sure whether my voice was being heard, and now I know that it is. I have proof that people aren't just hearing me, they're listening. Proof that the things I say matter. That is such a giddy feeling. I'm so honored that so many people have decided that they want to keep listening to the things I have to say. And hey, even if you aren't subscribed yet, it still means a lot that you chose to watch in the first place. Even if you care more about the things I'm saying than the person behind the voice right now, it means so much to me that you chose to hear those things from me. And I hope you'll consider sticking around to see what the future holds. And you know, hey, as long as I'm re-recording this script from the first time, I get to say this with my voice now too. Consider donating to the Patreon. Things are happening really quickly here. I did not anticipate making this much progress this fast. I have a whole post saying these things in a much more eloquent way. I don't have this part written down in front of me. So I would recommend that you go read that to get an explanation of things. It comes off really apologetic. I'm really bad at accepting money from people. I'm doubly bad at accepting praise on basically anything. But, you know, if you think the channel is worth supporting in that way, that would mean the world. That would mean the world and a half. Like, at least the world and, like, the moon and some of Mars. Jesus God, I gotta stop talking. With all of that said, though, here's to never having to think about this show again. At least until season 2, if it ever happens. If it does, I'll be here on the front lines telling you about why it sucks, or hopefully about telling you how it course corrects. Whatever happens, I'll be here. And I hope you'll be here too. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you have a good day. Take care of yourself.